aspect of the organization does the budgeting, and another body does the approval. I think what can be done is for the executive and the legislature to sit down and agree what exactly do we want to see in the budget for a particular year, and come up with the templates so that as long as executive has prepared that budget to that template, it shouldn't take long.
We have a lot more to discuss on the rest of the panel in Lagos or in Abuja. We'll be back in 2. We're talking about the budget, and we'll get to the performance part of the conversation when we return. Interested in the budget. So that's why we put this together between Channels Television and the Chevening alumni this day as we wrap up 2017 with a very critical year for 2016 budget, for the 2017 budget, and for 2018. I can't really remember the last time we had such a junction where 3 budgets are crowded at the same time within the same 12 calendar months. So we're trying to unpack that a little bit. So the conversation before we went on break was around the handshake that should be between the executive and the legislature. But so we got to the critical point. Whatever the amount, whatever the size, whatever the assumptions and whatever, Nigerians want to see a performance of the budget. So the question is, the performance of our annual budget, is it more about the numbers or because we don't really have what it takes to deliver? And that's the conversation taken up from here. So we're going to go straight to Abuja, where 2 of the Chevening alumni members are seated. Mr. Madaki, thank you very much for being there, and as well as Samuel Boluri are there for you. Mr. Ame, kick this off for us in terms of performance. When we say the budget has to perform, if the budget was not well delivered in the first place, or delivered on time, or delivered with faulty figures, is it possible to deliver it?
Yeah, no, it's not. The reason is that, there's so much more to the budgeting process than just the announcement of the figures. And to most Nigerians, honestly, those figures are meaningless. Because if the figures don't translate to a better life for them year on year, then we had better just change the parameters for the discussion. In fact, we have to change the discourse, because most of the time the figures are announced. A lot of the times, the funds are not released, either never released or not released on time. So when you start looking at actual budget performance against the figures that were announced, you discover that, they fall very far short of the actual expectation. And unless the intentions of government, get translated into real action by the release of the funds as and when due, by the actual, deployment of the resources in the direction in which the budget should carry the country, you will discover that many of the actions that were meant to be taken 5-6 years ago are still struggling to be taken, in the current year's budget. In fact, the budgeting system is so inefficient that some departments of government just roll over the figures year in, year out. If you look at the budgets for the last 5-6 years, you will discover that some items are being carried on, into the new budget every year. Maybe it was there last year, it was not executed. It's brought back again into this year's budget. It's carried over to the next year's budget, on and on and on and on. So when it comes to budget supervision, the oversight functions that the National Assembly has over, the executive, when it comes to budget execution, needs to actually be stepped up. Because it's very shameful, that at the end of the year, we talk about budget performance against plan, sometimes running into very ridiculous figures. I heard one of the states, mentioning that they had performed, their budget performance was at 28%. How can you be doing budget performance of 28% in the month of November, running into December for an entire year's budget, and you say, you are governing a state, so, and the federal government is not totally immune from that. I see some level of, energy, some level of seriousness, but there are some last-minute disbursements that have been made, For instance, the release of 750 billion naira, towards capital expenditure in the very last month of the year suggests that everything is being, packaged hurriedly in order to spend the budget, before the year runs out. And I don't think that's the best way to run a country. You have to structure the expenditure to match the timing so that things get done consistently. That's the only way we're going to move from point A to point B. But we still keep doing exactly the same set of things every time, and expect to see a different result. It doesn't work that way.
We thank you for your contributions there. Let's come back to the panel here in Lagos. Johnson Chukwu from Career Asset Management. Johnson, weighing into today's part of the budget, the administration is looking at 8.4 a trillion as the headline figure for 2018. Then we'll look at the various assumptions that could deliver 3.5 real GDP out of that number and all that. Then we'll come to that issue about the performance of the budget. What really is the problem with budget performance?
Well, the core of the problem is, one, the assumptions. And if you recognize the process of budgeting, the most critical factor is the assumption underlying the budget. If you make the wrong assumptions, you end up with a budget that has no meaning. Take, for instance, the assumptions of revenue. The president had announced in his budget presentation, 2018 budget presentation, that the 2016-17 budget had an underperformance in terms of revenue of 14% as at September. So that means, and the government had budgeted about 5.09 trillion as its revenue for the 2017 budget. So if you're having an underperformance, it simply means that the government now has to depend on borrowing to close that gap. And as you also recognize, if you look at the 2017 budget, the capital expenditure budget in 2017 was 2.177 trillion. The deficit in that budget was 2.35 trillion, which means the deficit was actually more than the capital expenditure budget. It then means that if there's a shortfall in revenue, there is no room for government to incur capital expenditure budget, because the capital expenditure budget becomes discretionary. It can only be incurred if you have already met your recurrent expenditure budget. And that is why the president said in his budget announcement that by October 2017, we've only incurred 450 billion of the entire 2.17 trillion, which is about 26% of the budget for capital expenditure. Because that expenditure could only have been incurred because the government had kept borrowing from the public. And if you, this year, for next year, 2018, we're also looking at the budget absorption that we are projecting a total revenue of 8.61 trillion, total expenditure of 8.61 trillion, total revenue about 6 trillion, a deficit about 2.02 trillion. and then capital expenditure budget of 2.4 trillion. So it then means